Yep, I gotcha.
Cool. Very cool. Have you ever been on a podcast before?
I have not. I've
First
listened to
podcast.
many podcasts.
Oh, very nice. uh, what what we'll do here to start is we could play a choose your own adventure. So we can talk
Okay.
about critical race theory or computer science, whichever one you'd like to talk about first.
Well, although I studied critical race theory in school, perhaps we should choose computer science.
Perhaps. All right, well let's go computer science. You have your degree in computer science, right? Don't you?
I do. I do.
From
I
from
have
the
a bachelor's of science in computer science.
Nice, nice. From Washington State, right? Western Washington University.
Western Washington University, correct.
Nice. I forget what was their the slogan. Wasn't it like "Make waves" or something, or "Big waves"?
I don't know. Their logo has some waves in it. I remember
It's
that was controversial.
it's "Make waves." Yeah, their thing is "Make waves." Do you feel like they
They
made waves there?
um no, I mean I've made like a little moderate splash perhaps, but I don't think there's not a lot of graduates of Western Washington University that have made tidal waves. Fun fact: Death Cab for Cutie met and formed the band at Western. That's one good
Seems
thing
like
about that place, I
that
guess.
seems like a pretty far reach for alumni, right? Are you? Is there any other famous, notable people? Do you know any?
Um, I don't really like that's they send out a newsletter. I actually just read it the other night where they try and highlight like notable achievements of graduates and yeah, I mean it's not Harvard or anything
Yeah.
like
Well, yeah,
that, but
yeah.
it's all right.
When did you get into computer science? Like when did you graduate high school knowing that you were going to go for that?
I knew from a very young age, yeah. I knew probably in like sixth grade or something like that. I didn't know, I guess, like what it was actually called. Like it was called computer science, but I knew what I
Mm.
wanted to do. Um, I from a young age, I had a group of friends that we were all interested in technology because keep in mind, when we were young growing up back in the day, this was like kind of the first evolution of computers as they exist today. This was like Windows 95 days.
Mm-hmm.
And we all got like our first home computers and we we started making crappy little websites. I don't know if anyone remembers there was this place called angelfire.com where you could just like build your own website. So we started doing that with just like HTML and stuff, and I really enjoyed it. And we'd have some like sweet scrolling marquees on the screen and like
Of
some counters at the bottom for how many people have visited your website. And then I just really enjoyed doing it.
Very interesting. So, what was your first like interaction with a computer? Like, was it the all-in-one Macintosh or?
Um, yes, well, it depends on how far back you want to go. I remember when I was a very, very young child, single digit age, my dad had a like a green screen sort of thing. It was before like Windows was a thing. It was when you turned on a computer and it was just all like terminal based and you had to
I
type
had
in
one of those too.
commands.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was like my very first experience with a computer, but that was like I was so young I wasn't allowed to use it or anything like that. And then my real hands-on experience with a computer, I can actually tell you, I remember it very vividly, where it was a Christmas present from my dad. He had sent us a Acer computer with, I think it probably had Windows 95 on it. And I remember trying to get it set up with my mom, and in the other room, my brother and my sister were watching the movie Scream, and I was on computer duty with my mom because I wasn't old enough to watch the scary movie with my brother and sister.
Very nice. So your young age, you really like it. You like being able to see what you can and can't do with a computer. Then you go to high school, and then you're in college. And are they just teaching you different languages? Like, is the goal to just be able to flex and stretch the capabilities of the internet or what the computer can do?
Kind of, yeah. I think so. I like progressed into middle school and high school, and I learned more complicated stuff, just kind of self study on my own. So like if you talk to anyone who does software engineering, um, in any like professional sense, they'll tell you like, oh, HTML isn't like, like that's not real coding, which I mean, I would agree with. It's not really coding. So then like I started learning new things like JavaScript and then like Java and these other languages that exist for writing apps. Um, when I went to high school, there were some classes where you could actually learn like dedicated curriculum where you could actually learn this stuff, but it was all still pretty entry level, like somewhat simple, like building web pages and stuff like that. Um, and then when I went to college, I knew exactly what I wanted to do, so I started my computer science classes right away. And at first, they try and teach you sort of like core fundamentals. The first language that they had us use is something called Ada at my school, which no one, I bet half the people who are software engineers or more probably have never even heard of Ada because it's just like this obscure language that no one really uses in the industry. Um, and then as you start to progress through those classes, they have you, I'd say the focus isn't really so much on the language. Like any good software engineer should be able to pick up a language relatively quickly and start using it. Maybe not be like, like know the ins and outs and everything that there is to know about the language, but it should be like similar to using a tool in like a workshop. Like maybe you haven't used a chisel a lot in woodworking, but like you know how to craft wood and you can probably figure out how to use a chisel. Um, More of the focus is on the fundamentals of problem solving and how to approach complex problems in a way where you can, how do I say this, like find a solution. It's almost like it's very mathematical in a lot of
Mm.
ways where you're given a very complex problem and you have to break it down into smaller parts to figure out how to essentially arrive at a solution.
Yeah, that was kind of my, and I think most people have may not even know that there's multiple coding languages, but more so of like, why are there different languages, and is it like going from like, oh well, I know Spanish, so I could learn Mandarin faster, which isn't necessarily true. Kind of each language verbally can be very different, and then there are people that know three and five. Are there You kind of hinted at that there are fundamentals that if you know how to use this, like picking up a hammer or a mallet or then a sledgehammer, it all kind of makes sense. Is that the similarities? And then the second part of the question is why are there more? Are there like just limitations that you problems that you can solve with each?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it is, I'd say it's similar to almost like verbal languages in the sense that someone who can speak Spanish can pick up Italian easier because the languages themselves are like, they are different languages, but they're similar in nature. But then someone who speaks Spanish is probably going to have a harder time picking up like Arabic because they're not rooted in like kind of the same origin. Same idea with coding languages. Like there are some languages that you could probably more easily pick up and adapt. I'd say the one difference is anyone who is a software engineer should be capable. and confident in being able to pick up any other language. So that's probably the difference where like trying to go from like Spanish to Arabic would be like a large undertaking. I'm sure it would take like months or years of study to do that. Languages is kind of like that, but on a much smaller scale where it shouldn't take you months or years to learn the language, no matter how different they are. Um, in terms of why are there different languages, they each language kind of approaches some of the fundamentals slightly differently. I think part of it is people think that they can do it better, so they sort of build their own language because they feel like they have this idea in their head of like, oh, I wish this language did this instead of that or what have you. So they kind of take that on and try and do it. Um, languages can be better for different languages can be better for different types of problems as well. And languages tend to develop a community around them that can kind of push the language to be used for one type of research or capability versus another. Um, so, like Python's a good example. Python is a programming language that gets used pretty heavily for like big, I'll call it like big data, like trying to analyze like very large data sets. So a lot of people who work in finance use Python to try and like play the stock market.
Mm.
You hear things about machine learning and artificial intelligence these days, which are really all rooted in uh, really like very mathematical, like they have a very strong like mathematical basis behind them, and they have to deal with a lot of very large data sets. So Python's a very common language for those. But then you look at something for like building websites, and JavaScript is like the de facto language for building a lot of, well, basically building websites because JavaScript is the only programming language that can be run in your web browser. So different purposes for each one, but
Well,
they're all
is
rooted
that a
in very
product
similar
in?
fundamentals.
Is that kind of a product of, well, the all the websites already use it, so if you're going to make a new browser, you might as well run JavaScript? Is that like kind of why it's just one of those like, well, it is because that's what we use and that's what we have been using?
Yeah, there's kind of a history of that for sure. I think I I'm trying to remember some of the specifics around the origin of JavaScript, but basically the early browsers they supported the ability to execute this JavaScript code. And in the early days, I mean, there were only like one or two like main web browsers. I won't go back too far, but you can think back to like Netscape Navigator was like a popular browser back in the day, and then Internet Explorer kind of came along and started competing with them quite a bit. Basically those browsers were crafted in a way where JavaScript was just something that was able to be executed in those browsers. And now, just like due to historical reasons, and now the internet is such a large part of everyone's life and it bleeds into technology everywhere. You can't just like all of a sudden one day say, oh, browsers should now support Python or like another programming language because that's not a switch that you can just like flip really quickly and easily. It takes a long time for browsers to build that support to do that, and then there's all sorts of protocols for just how the internet works in general that would need to adapt and sort of adhere to allowing Python into that ecosystem more. Um,
And would it be worth
so
it? I mean, are there limitations that JavaScript has that are frustrating, that it was like, if we could snap our fingers and go to a different language, the potential of what you could and couldn't do would be greater?
yes and no. I'd say the language itself has sort of evolved over the years to become like if there are shortcomings, the language itself has evolved over the years to try to um, fill those gaps. And then what I'm talking about too, without trying to go into too much detail, is like websites. There's like the browser part of your website, the stuff that's actually running on your machine, but then all that is being served up by servers. So there are servers out in the world, places where these websites are being loaded from, and your server can run on any really any technology, any language. So that kind of helps fill the gap and bridge it too, because now if you really wanted to have like a website that does a lot of really hardcore like data processing or some kind of function that like JavaScript wouldn't be appropriate for, you can basically have the server kind of do that, and then it just kind of takes the results once it's done crunching the numbers, so to speak, and it just sends it to the browser so that you can kind of see what the outcome was.
Yeah, so I'm kind of in the weeds here, but so technically, so there's what I see. Like I go on Google and I see the Google homepage, and then below that is a
Yep.
bunch of like parentheses and words and greater than signs of all the code of what in not specifically Google, but maybe Facebook's a better example of like a blue button and then a blue bar and a green this and this color text and these size boxes, and those are a bunch of like codes and executes and everything, right? And if I'm using the wrong verbiage, I'm sorry, but
No, it's fine. Yeah.
and then the next layer, but then there's another layer of just ones and zeros, right? The servers that you were talking about, and that's happening
Yeah.
of like, and then so that's like a lot of characters of like we need to make the ones and zeros to make the parentheses that spells out this code sentence that would actually do that. Is there another layer behind that of the ones and zeros?
So the ones and zero, that's yeah, it's an interesting topic. So when we talk about like programming languages, right? So you're using a language to like spell out these like kind of broad strokes or characteristics of like a website or a whatever program you're writing. So you kind of use the example of like the blue button. So you give it these different characters of like in the code it would say like, oh, I want a button, and then the button color should be blue and this and that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Now all these languages, they're like we'll refer to those as like high level languages or higher level languages. These are languages that have been built on top of like the core infrastructure of computers, and they're almost there at this higher level to make it easier for software engineers to write code. Because obviously it would be extremely hard to write a program if you're manually typing 1 0 0 1 1 0.
Right.
Now those high level languages, they go through a process called compilation. So you compile your code. What that typically gets compiled down to is something called assembly. So assembly is sort of a middle ground between that binary code, that what those ones and zeros, and the high level languages. Assembly, uh, this isn't my area of expertise, so I might say things slightly wrong, but assembly, typically there is a assembly language by processor. So your computer, your machine has a CPU, a central processing unit in it. That CPU is the piece of your computer that's actually um, executing programs. And historically, at least, each CPU or brand of CPU had its own assembly language that it understood. So high level languages would get compiled down into assembly. Assembly effectively gets fed into your computer's CPU, and then that even goes down like another layer where essentially that assembly gets broken down into these ones and zeros that the really it's the hardware of your machine understands, because at the end of the day the physical hardware components of your machines, the only thing that they know how to do is basically flip a value from being on to off, or that's where one and zero comes from. One is on and zero is off.
Right.
um, I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, yeah. I was just I think a lot of people just see. And then I think that's where a lot of questions come up where we're like, well, why can't you just do this? Why can't you just make it? And it's when you kind of look back and peel back all the layers of like what has to happen to get to that stage, it's like, with the languages and everything, and if you're familiar, yeah, you just delete the word blue and then type out green, which is great. But if you keep backing up and peeling away the layers, there's like a lot that goes into that. Are there any savages out there that code in ones and zeros because they're maybe other than either just elitist or they actually feel like they have more control?
That's a great question. I've never heard of anyone who would actually code in ones and zeros, although like the binary concept is something that you learn when you study computer science. So when I went through school, we never actually coded in ones and zeros, but we spent a good amount of time understanding how binary is represented and how you like our number system is base 10, right? So you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then you start over with 11, 12, 13, 14, so on.
Right.
So binary is like a whole other way of counting. So we learned how to do that, like count in binary, because that's basically what computers do. And then we did write code in assembly, which is assembly is like the lowest level anyone would write code. Without being just like no one would actually write in ones and zeros.
Like, why are
Assembly is
you
like as
doing
far
that?
down
It's
as you
so
would
like,
go.
and the amount of knowledge that you would have to have, or at least the recall to know what everything is, right? You would have to know strings of numbers just to be like, okay, I want an A. An A is 0 1 0 0 1 0 1 0. I'm just making this up. But then if you
Yeah,
wanted a parentheses, it would have to be like all these ones and zeros, right?
yeah, and it would be extremely difficult and complicated to even do anything remotely meaningful coding like that, because the moment you screw up one of those ones or zeros, your entire system would break, and you would just be stuck staring at a screen of ones and zeros, wondering which one is wrong, and you would just want to pull your hair out. So
But
that would never
somebody,
happen.
but somebody typed all that stuff in, right?
Someone probably created. So when you say typed all that stuff in, you mean like typed in the ones and zeros?
Right. Like at some point, there
Yeah.
has like the
So
computer has to understand that one is that.
yeah, I'd say someone does it on like a very, very small scale. So there are probably folks out there that build systems where they probably built something where they said, okay, like if we took a number, like the number 7 represented in binary as ones and zeros, and if we wanted to add the number 42 to it, also represented in ones and zeros, like what would that look like to actually blend these two binary numbers together and produce a result? So there's like computers at the end of the day are a gazillion teeny tiny simple small problems like that, like adding two numbers together, and then you start building and grouping bigger problems on top of those small problems. So now we know how to add two numbers together. Maybe I want to add, 8 numbers together. Well, you can use the two number solution to kind of aggregate up to adding 8 numbers, or like multiplication. If I wanted to do multiplication, really that's a more complex version of addition in many ways. So you just start solving these very simple problems, and those produce building blocks that you can then use as basically inputs to build more complex solutions. And that's really what coding is at the end of the day, is over the decades that computers have existed as we know them today, people just build and solve very small problems, and then other people come along and kind of stand on the shoulders of those people who have solved easier problems, and then they can now solve even more complex problems because they don't have to worry about all the low level details of that small problem that's already been solved.
Right. Yeah. It's like you can only be as smart as like even if you're the best coder now, if you were to be born in the '60s, there's just only so much that you can do. Like you just can't because it just takes years and
Yeah,
years.
it's almost like, I mean, if you think about, I guess, like the progression of society in general. I mean, technology is like, you think about like the industrial revolution and all that kind of stuff. Like technology is just an extension of how humanity has progressed as as a race in general. Back in the day of like the caveman days, they figured out how to harness fire, and then eventually fire, I don't know, it like that's like one small problem to solve, and then eventually someone realized, okay, well now we know how to get fire. Like how can we use that now to like cook food, I guess. Of like, okay, great, now we know how to cook food. Like what do we do with that? So it's just like throughout humanity we're solving these like small problems that we don't have to worry about anymore. And now we can spend our time and energy solving larger problems. And that's really all. Like technology is just an existence or an extension to that. And then there's sort of this like micro experience within technology itself where technology just progresses by virtue of people solving smaller technological problems.
Those damn marketing people. Which brings me to
Yeah.
the more shady side of the internet, which is Um, I guess I kind of have a question of a capability of what something like a website or a laptop could do, and then you kind of tell me if that's possible and if we could do it right now, like if you had the time and the energy. So I have Face ID
Yeah.
on my phone. It's able to make sure, like, it knows enough data that it knows my face, and the chances of it being wrong are very slim. So it knows where I'm looking, if I'm looking at the screen, if I have sunglasses on, things like this. And this was actually in a Black Mirror episode. And there's this guy, and he was watching an advertisement that he didn't like because of the story or whatever. And he keeps looking away because he can't watch it, and he's closing his eyes, and it keeps pausing. So the only way
Mm.
that he can move on, and they're in like regular jail cells or whatever, they're locked in their rooms, and so he has to at least look at and pay attention to these things because there's like a camera on his face or whatever. Do you think
Yeah.
that technology could be out now where, instead of clicking the next button with the 15-second ad, because sometimes, you're on YouTube or whatever, and you click on a video and it starts talking about whatever, and you just look away and you're like, all right, I'm just going to do something else while okay, the ad's over. I'm going to click next and go on. Do you think you could code for that?
Um, I think
If
it's
Apple gave
technically
you
possible for
if,
sure.
if Apple gave you the intellectual property?
Yeah, it would be possible. I'd say like technology wise, it's definitely possible. I'd say the limiting factors are more like ethical and or I'll use the term political, not in the terms of like geopolitics, but just like kind of everyday people interaction politics. So the limitations would be like ethics and like politics. So technically, you could write something like YouTube. Let's say like YouTube. If YouTube had access to a camera on your laptop or on your phone or whatever, and as you were watching a video, and it was able to basically stream you watching the video in real time, they could write software without a whole lot of difficulty, I think, to identify if your eyes are currently looking at the screen or not. And if your eyes were not currently looking at the screen, then pause the video or pause the ad or whatever. So from a technical implementation standpoint, I don't see any reason why we wouldn't be able to accomplish that. But where that starts to fall over is there are like more social constructs that would prevent that from happening. So, um, like YouTube is not going to get access to your camera while you're watching a video. I mean, there are, I guess, like kind of the conspiracy things out there where maybe they're like already like watching us in real time and streaming our video and using our phones and stuff like that. But I don't know if I'm fully bought into those. I think like I guess working in technology and just kind of the like the product space, it would be very difficult for the private sector, um, for an individual company to be doing that on a widespread scale without it coming out and without that private company needing to modify how the internet works, or have to be in cahoots with Apple to like make sure Apple's gonna allow people's phones to send them the video feed without them knowing. um,
It would just be too
there
much
are
data, right? It would have to be, we would have to know. It would have to be like, oh yeah, we have a R&D department for facial recognition and like micro expressions, and all you have to do is opt into our terms and conditions of, do you allow YouTube to use your camera while watching? And if you do, you get
it's more
YouTube Premium for free.
it's more stuff like that, right? Like where like the product managers at YouTube would need to call up the folks at Apple and the folks at well, Android, which is really kind of part of the same overarching org as YouTube. But they would need to like call these different organizations and be like, hey, like you build phones, you build computers, like we want to take advantage of people's cameras while they're using our products so that we can better, like better serve them ads or whatever. And somewhere in this like grand scheme of things, someone's going to be like, well, that's kind of jacked up. Like, that doesn't seem ethical. Now, not to say stuff like that can't happen, because obviously, like, I mean, there are conspiracies in the world that are not really conspiracies. They're real, like, actual shady things that do happen. But I think the ones that are um, legitimate, they can't happen on a very like broad, wide scale across millions of people in that way. Where like these like you would need dozens or hundreds of people in these organizations to sort of like be in on it to like make this happen. I think the conspiracies that are real, like I guess, yeah, granted it can impact millions of people, but you need like a pretty close knit, tight group of folks that can sort of like keep the secret and keep it under wraps. Like if
Yeah.
something like that was going on, like we would know about it. Now, that's not to say that they can't take advantage of people's sloppiness or lack of understanding, where you go to a website and you just click through the terms and conditions and you're like, yeah, I don't care.
Who
So there
does
could be a
that?
world where, yeah, right, there could be a world where something like that went to market, and then to get past all the legal liability, they just like had you like agree that they were going to do this to you without you really fully being informed that you were agreeing to it. But again, like if that was happening, like eventually that story is gonna, like that's not gonna be secret for very long. That would come out, and people would realize that they would need to provide more informed consent.
Yeah, and in a world where we are just giving informed consent, or at least partial informed consent, of like we have Alexas and Google and homes and iPhones and Apple Watches. I'm connected to like 7 different microphones right now. What's something that uh, people are doing, or at least giving consent to, that makes you a little bit nervous? So you're kind of a little bit more behind the curtain. What's something that you see people do all the time and you're like, that's not what I would do? Or is there
Yeah,
anything?
yeah. I mean, I think like the Google Homes and the Alexas are one where there is a, I mean, there is like an ethical gray area, and I honestly don't know. I don't know the details of this, but like I'm convinced to some degree that there is a degree of like we have Google Homes all over our house, and I think it is probably listening at times when I don't realize or would want it to be listening. I mean, it's really kind of always listening for you to say, hey Google or whatever. But it's probably indexing and storing or mining conversations and information that I don't even really fully realize. That is like I don't even really necessarily see that at conspiracy level. I was talking about like what would be a conspiracy level thing that folks could get away with. I'm not even sure if I view that as a conspiracy level, but I could see why some people would. That's something where I would have to like go dig through the terms and conditions of when I agreed to use my Google Home and set it up. That like, is there some fine print in there that says that, oh, it might store or mine some of the audio that it receives outside of whatever I say after "Hey Google." Now that being said, I don't think there's like a couple guys hanging out at Google just like opening up random audio files on their computer and listening to people's conversations. I think that data, assuming that they're doing it, is probably being fed into computers to do automated analysis. And it's not really something where people are being like pinpointed on an individual by individual basis, or um, something that they would, I don't know, send it to the government to spy on us. Maybe I'm being ignorant. I don't know, but
Yeah, I mean it's just like dictation, right? So somebody could write a program, and it is so much data, right? But you could still run a program. The feds could be in there and be like, okay, can you pull up any profiles that have been talking about, if they had a specific chemical that they were searching for that they found at like an explosion or something, and be like, okay, can you look up keywords like propane or fertilizer or blah blah blah, and then they just could be like, okay, here's a map, right? Like that's not just crazy talk. That's easily could happen, right?
yeah, I mean there are techniques out there that like cyber forensic investigators can use to like look through your search history and stuff like that. Honestly, they're like, I mean, maybe I'm being somewhat ignorant on some of this because I don't know how a lot of like that stuff works in terms of like um, the reach that the government has to identify or find if I ever in my life have like Googled like how to build a bomb or something.
Mm-hmm.
But there are like very reasonable techniques that can be taken to identify that. So like Google, if you use like I use Google Chrome as my browser of choice, and with Google Chrome, I'm actually logged into the browser, and it keeps like my bookmarks synced across all my different computers and all that good stuff. Um, because I'm logged into the browser, they can also like store more information about things that I've searched for and stuff like that as well. So there are trails that you can follow to try and find information back like that. But I I don't know. I'm sure there's a lot more crazy stuff out there than I even realize. But I'm not fully convinced that there's like the government has a wiretap on this magical internet line somewhere in the country where it's just like listening to all the traffic going through it, and
Right,
it's
right.
yeah, so stuff like that. There are never mind,
do you
sorry.
do you do you typically, well, it sounds like you already answered that, but do you ever go on like, I've noticed that on my phone and on my laptop there's like a private mode or like a incognito mode, I
Yeah,
think. I never use it. Do you ever use it, or do you think it
yeah, I
is a good
do.
idea to use it for like
Yeah,
apps,
I
right?
think it can. Yeah, it can be a good idea to use it. It helps protect people from being susceptible to like really targeted ads. It won't track you to as deep of a level of detail. There are also like I use an extension on my browser called uBlock all the time. It's just an ad blocker basically. But that's software that you can add onto your browser where it will try to identify and prevent you from being served up just like a bunch of ads, or like have your data being sent to people's analytics systems so that they can track you. So that it kind of protects you in multiple ways where like one, if I go to like a news website, I don't get as many ads on the web page as I normally do because it's blocking that, which is great for me. It just makes my web experience more pleasant. But then at the same time, it's doing stuff behind the scenes where there's websites. Well, pretty much every website is tracking everything that their users are doing and sending that information to their backend systems so that they can kind of analyze user behavior and what are things that like what things are people clicking on or what links are they following, stuff like that, and it helps block against that kind of tracking as well. So I would recommend getting an ad blocker for your browser if you don't have one already, and the one
I don't.
that I would recommend is
uBlock.
uBlock.
Nice.
Yeah.
Are websites like Facebook or maybe shadier ones, are they able to track my mouse? So where I'm hovering over or if I'm moving?
Oh yeah.
And do you think, and then the same thing with Instagram on my phone, if I pause on a picture and then zoom in and then scroll through, it's just every time it's like somebody, not actually, but somebody with a stopwatch, like, oh, he's reading the post. Okay, he moved on.
Oh
Oh,
yeah.
he reading the post. All that. That's all.
I that's all getting tracked for sure. Especially with like systems like Facebook and Instagram, like their market and their product is like user engagement, so they want like that's extremely important data for them. So things like where are people pausing, like what things are people liking, like where are you slowing down your scroll, how much time is this person's post on the screen as you're going by, or like ad, how long is this ad on the screen as you're going by. That stuff, that's all extremely valuable information for them, and yeah, you can pretty much guarantee that they're collecting and tracking all of that. um,
Yeah, and
I,
that
I
can be really.
can
Go ahead.
I was gonna say I can give kind of like an interesting anecdote, I guess, from an employer of mine, which will remain nameless. But there is so this web application that I've worked on. It's a shopping experience where you would go out and buy a product, and there is software on that where agents, like reps that are there to kind of help you or assist you in the shopping experience, they could actually proactively uh, listen in on your session or like look in on your session. So they can't see your entire computer screen, but they can see your entire experience on that website, and they can watch you in real time as you're navigating through and clicking buttons and all that, and they can do that without you even knowing that they're watching you in real time.
And that's not
Now
an
there
opt-in.
are no, that's not an opt-in, and there are protections in place. So like this organization, like we like privacy is extremely important, like being able to not view someone's personal information. So like in that kind of a system, you're like the data that you're entering into like text box and different fields, that would all be obscured. Like that agent wouldn't be able to view that information. It would all be redacted essentially, but they would be able to see like what are you clicking on, or like, oh, you made it to this screen in the shopping experience and you're kind of like pausing or you look hesitant, like, and then they could proactively send you like the little chat messages that you see in the bottom corner. They could proactively send you a message and be like, oh hey, like it looks like you're not sure about this purchase, like is there anything I can do to help. Now that is possible. I'll say it's not like a widely used feature, but it is something that's there. There's not like people on staff that are just like doing that. Like that's not like their job, but it is
Right.
a technical capability that is built into the tooling that exists.
And that is
So
happening,
that's kind
right?
of
They may not. Well, I think the problem and kind of the solution is that if it's not a super popular website, they can get away with stuff like that, right? Because they don't really have as many eyes on them. But obviously, like Home Depot or Facebook, they're constantly getting reviewed, and their staffing is huge. But if you have, a 30-man team, and you're doing that, and you could do you don't because you have to code for the redacted spots, right? You would have to put something that
Yeah.
says, "Hey, the user can't see that." But if you don't put it, then they can see all of that, right?
Yeah, definitely. And there is an element of self-regulation and self-policing that needs to occur. I would say larger organizations tend to have more refined practices and procedures around that kind of policing and regulation because these organizations, if they get caught doing stuff that they shouldn't be doing, like they can be held very, very liable, and like that can be very like brand tarnishing for them and
Right.
like financially impactful for them. What you kind of have to worry about more are like the smaller companies or like the not to like rag on startups or anything, but like the startups where you have like the 10 people sitting in a room trying to build this thing out and they're not aware of like all of the legal regulatory like statutes that they need to adhere by. They're just kind of like trying to move fast and like, get a product out there. And I think it's safe to assume that they probably cut many corners like that. And yeah, that's more of a concern. But for them, like being a small company like that, there's no guarantee that your business is going to succeed anyways. So their focus isn't in that arena. Their focus is trying to like survive and like get their product out there. And like if they get caught doing something like that they shouldn't do, there's a somewhat small risk that they would actually get caught. And then
Right.
like if it sinks the company, it's kind of like, oh well, there was an 80% chance we were going to sink anyways. So
Yeah.
oops, let's go start the new company.
Yeah, I think it would be more of a problem, or I think people would be a little bit more careful if their bank didn't back them on, stolen purchases, right? Like if that was the case, would you even ever type your credit card online? Like if the bank was like, "Hey, if somebody gets your credit card number and buys something online, like that's on you." You would never type your credit card in, right?
Yeah. I generally, so as a matter of practice, I've gotten looser with this over the years, but I generally have kept a separate card or like bank account that I would use for any kind of online shopping or even like not even online shopping, even if it's like an in-person shopping experience. Anything that I feel like could be slightly like questionable or sketchy. Because I figure worst case scenario, like let's say I'm using like a debit card. If I'm using a debit card for a bank account that I keep a very small balance of money in, if it does get compromised, it's kind of like, yeah, I'm out that money that was in the account in the worst case scenario, but I never really kept that much money in there anyways, so it's kind of like, eh. Um, I will say payment is one of the areas where um, things tend to be pretty well done with payment. I don't want to say that for every site out there, especially if it's a like just a straight up sketchy looking website. But if there's a legitimate business, like large or small, that is collecting payment information, there are so many vendors and tools out there that their whole purpose is to provide businesses large and small with payment solutions at like an affordable rate. Like I've never seen, I guess, like an organization that doesn't use a payment tool like that. So like the organizations I'm thinking of are like Stripe or Square or like Shopify, stuff like that. Like these are companies whose business is to provide a mechanism for small businesses or large businesses to collect payment information in a safe, secure way. They take a cut of it, but then at the same time, for these businesses, it's easier for them because they just have to do this one integration with with Stripe or Square or Shopify or whatever, and they handle all the payment details for you in a secure way versus me being a small business trying to figure out like, okay, how do I contact a bank and tell them this person's account number and like should be giving me, $50. Like that's a very like complicated or like difficult problem for like thousands of companies to all solve independently, and instead we have these like payment vendors that just already do that stuff for you, and it's advantageous for these small companies to just use these payment vendors that already do it for you and do it in a secure way, which is nice.
Nice. But they don't have to if they want to do it on the cheap. They can just steal your shit.
um, yeah, I mean, yeah, if you have a sketchy site
Well, I think
or
you're able to see. I mean, I've been on the internet for a while now, so I can tell the difference between. But I think there are different levels of what I expect or what I see from websites. Like the websites that I would buy from are very, in my opinion, they're clean and I trust them. And then sometimes I see my wife on websites where I'm like, I wouldn't buy that from there. Like that seems really sketchy. And then the I
yeah.
find out that it's like just a European company or whatever, and then the shipping just takes longer and things like that. But I think your level of what you're like, this looks sketchy. You're able to see a lot more than most people. You know?
Yeah, that's fair. I think sometimes I forget that because I'm not watching everyone else kind of on the internet all the time.
Right.
So it's hard to, I guess, like account for the things that I might notice that other people might not notice. So I think that's fair to say for sure.
Is there anything on websites that you see or that how your computer starts acting where you're like, this is sketchy? I think in the past it would be like if you went on a website and you just got a bunch of pop-ups, you'd be like, oh, this is sketchy. I'm closing this. I'm out of here. But those pop-ups don't happen anymore. They all go behind the scenes.
Yeah, I think there's the number one thing that I'd probably look for is in the URL, the address bar of your browser, where like the address of the website is. You want you want to find at the beginning of the URL, it should say HTTPS. You might have to like click into it to see it, or to the left of the URL, there might be like a little lock icon. That's an important thing to look out for, especially if you're ever in a situation where you're um, going to be submitting or typing in any like sensitive personal information. You should always, always, always ensure that you see that HTTPS at the beginning of the URL, or like that little lock icon up there. If that's
Can
not there, then it's not a secure connection, and your information is not protected.
can they fake that?
They can't fake that. That's on the browser itself, so it's really like your machine that's enforcing that. The website can't affect that directly.
Okay, yeah, not to say that just because the lock is there, it's a perfectly safe thing, but that just means that if you don't see a lock or you don't see that address, then you should be a little bit more skeptical.
Yeah, and I mean that's a good point in that there are you have to make sure you're looking at the right thing, I guess, because there are fake websites out there where I'm going at with this is like the tech support scams. So you'll see people who accidentally mistype the URL of like maybe a popular website. Like maybe they're intending to go to LinkedIn.com and they accidentally put two Ks in linked or something. That could take them to this like sketchy website, and there could be a pop up on the window of the sketchy website that looks like a Windows pop up. And it might be telling you that your computer is infected with a virus or something like that. You need to call this phone number to get tech support to like solve the issue. That's a good example of like a malicious website that is trying to produce a pop-up that looks like something that your computer can legitimately show on the screen, but they're really just using smoke and mirrors to try and trick you. So yeah, I'm saying like look out for that lock icon or the HTTPS, but you also have to have some level of knowing, okay, like is this really the browser URL address bar, or is this something that looks like the browser URL address bar and I'm being duped here? Um, so yeah, there's an element of that for sure.
And then this may just be my ignorance, but is there, so back in the day, or I mean now too, but viruses and malicious websites running programs on your computer was a big thing. You always wanted to get like a virus protection thing, and then I kind of moved to Macs, and at the time you don't really have to worry about it, and I wasn't really going into these like weird websites or just searching the web in general. It's pretty basic where I go. But then I always felt like if I was browsing on my phone, like my phone has never got a virus. Is that a product of people don't really write viruses for phones? Or is that just, oh no, that's just as susceptible? I could have a virus on my phone. I just don't know. Things like that.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'd say like, and I'm definitely not an expert in this area. I'd say it's definitely possible that phones could be infected or have viruses, but like me, for instance, I don't have antivirus software on my phone. A big issue with like the just overarching like virus pandemic with home computers really stems back to fundamental differences with how like the Windows operating system was originally produced and how like other like you mentioned like Macs have a very different like foundation and like fundamental implementation of how the operating system was created versus Windows. Now, the origins of technology, when a lot of these things were built to start with, Mac kind of lucked out in that they're building on top of these other operating systems that had security built in at a very fundamental level. Windows didn't necessarily have that at as much of a fundamental level, and a lot of that is because I don't think anyone like when computers first started coming out, it was just like a bunch of geeky people who like, just wanted to like flex technology, and they weren't really thinking about like, oh, is Joe gonna try to like maliciously attack? It's like you hanging out with your neighbors. Like you don't expect your neighbors gonna like break into your house. Like you know them and like you see them.
And I live right next to them.
And
Yeah, yeah.
and you live right. Yeah, exactly.
It was
So I
built more
think
on
like
like
there
an
was
honor
this.
system of like, oh, it's, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So then, like, all of a sudden, it became a larger thing. People with less ethical, moral integrity decided that they could manipulate the system and started doing these things. And like Windows had to start like backfilling in security the best they could, and it just I don't know. It's a whole game of cat and mouse. So if I'm on a Windows machine, I definitely have antivirus software running, and they've done a better job over the years with like more native antivirus protection, like Windows Defender is like a big one now, which I think is more native on Windows machines. But yeah, I'm on a Mac, and I actually don't have any antivirus on my Mac. Hopefully, I'm not putting a target on my head. Um, but
That
yeah,
may be the four people that watch this or have made it to this far. They
maybe
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 those
one of
people
those four.
are coders.
Yeah,
I mean, because I think most people through the intro were like,
yeah,
I saw on the social network they had like little coding wars and people were plugged in. When I was in the Navy, I would see deployments and ships and everything, and then I would watch movies like Battleship or movies with the Navy in it, and I'm just like, and I just roll my eyes because it's like very
yeah.
frustrating, and you're like, this isn't like this is a very, it's not necessarily wrong, but like that's just not how it works. Are there coding wars like that? Like, is there like an esports of coding?
Yeah. So there's a few things there, right? So there are. I'll take it like one at a time. So I guess like the example of like the Navy, you see like the Navy. represented in like Hollywood and movies, and like it's like alien, like Navy ships battling aliens in the ocean and stuff like that, versus I'm sure like the actual day to day of naval life isn't nearly that exciting. Same thing with coding, and like hackers is like the big one, right? Like you always see like hackers in movies and TV, and like a lot of these like CSI type shows, you know, like where they're doing like the forensic, like, oh, I'm gonna trace their IP and blah blah blah. Like that's then there's like things flashing all over the screens. That's all just hype and not real at all. Um, the probably the most accurate representation of coding and like hacker life, I guess, is probably the show Mr. Robot, which I think was on FX. So if you're
Oh
looking for
yeah.
something that's like somewhat realistic, that's probably the most realistic one you could find. Um, but yeah, like there's a great comic out there that has floated around in like the software engineer slash I guess like hacker space where it's like side by side what movies show hacking as, and it's just like the guy with the sunglasses with the pop-ups and the screens going everywhere, and then like
Yeah.
the real picture is just like this guy sitting in front of a laptop just like thinking, and then there's like a little word bubble and he goes, oh, what if I, and then he realizes like, oh no, that won't work, and he just like keeps thinking. That's like the realistic part of it. um God, I forgot what the other question was.
Like the
I got off
esports
on
of
that
coding,
tangent.
like is there, or even like maybe like a Goodwill Hunting where there's like people that go out and they're like, hey, solve this problem. Hey, so, who can solve this problem? You'll get a job.
Yeah, so there's actually a lot of stuff like that, I would say. Maybe not in the same vein of like solve this problem and you get a job, but there's a lot of you'll hear them referred to as like leak code exercises, where people who are in the software engineering industry, when you go and interview for a job, there is an aspect of like kind of the normal interview that you would expect to have, which is like, tell me about a time when you did this thing, or like what's your experience, like let's talk about your background and your history, or like, you know, like tell me about a situation where you needed to resolve conflict, stuff like that. That is an aspect of it. But what kind of sucks about the software engineering world is when you interview, there's also a very large technical interview aspect to roles that you apply for. So the technical interview typically involves you either virtually or in person in a room on a computer with someone, and they basically give you a problem, a technical problem, and you have to solve it on the spot. So
And they're just
sometimes they
watching you,
make you
right?
do it, and they're just watching. Yeah, and sometimes there's like two or three people just like
Nice. Not awkward at all.
silently watching you. Oh
Just
no,
like,
it's terrible. Yeah, and the whole time you're like, wow, these people think I'm an idiot, but you just kind of like muscle through it. So there's a ton of websites out there that refer to these things as like leak code problems or exercises. So a lot of software engineers will spend a certain segment of time solving problems like that, sort of to like keep their skills sharp and try and like not stray away from that stuff too far, because eventually you're gonna have to like code something on the spot like that. Um, so there is stuff like that, and then like from the hacking side of things, there are. I was actually talking to some people at work about this yesterday. There's websites like Hack the Box or Try Hack Me, and they're educational sites that are meant to show people different hacking techniques that you can use, but they allow you to do it in a like in an ethical, legitimate way where you're not actually trying to break into someone's machine or computer or network or something.
yeah,
I'm sorry if you can hear my cat. He's at the door
I
meowing.
can. Yeah, it's all good. So when I go, I typically use YouTube for two main things. I use it to watch people perform or like do CrossFit at a really high level, and it's entertaining, and I'm like, wow, that's crazy. Sometimes I'll pull tips and exercise things from them, but most of the time it's just me, similar to how somebody would watch football. And I also like watch professional football. It's just being played at a really high level. And then the second one, I use it as a lot of times when I'm editing video or I'm trying to solve a problem with things and software items that I use, it's usually technical videos where it's like, hey, this is how you do that. Do you have something similar in the coding world where, or in computer science, where you have people that you admire that you watch and you're just like fascinated at what they're able to do in their job? And then also like videos where you're like, okay, I just need to figure out how to make this a gray box or in things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. There are a few places. So there are like dedicated sites out there in the world. One popular one, which is a proprietary one, is called Pluralsight. Another one is egghead.io. These are things that are similar in nature to like Skillshare. If you've ever heard of Skillshare, use
Mm-hmm.
Skillshare. It's like these are like dedicated like educational sites where you go to like learn a specific topic. So there's a lot of things like that for like technology and software. But then uh, outside of that, YouTube is the same exact thing. So I have like certain YouTubers that I follow in the technology space, and whenever they push out a new video, I tend to watch it. And a lot of it's just like interesting little like tips and tricks, or like here's a technology that's becoming popular. Like here's an overview of what it is and how it works. And then yeah, sometimes if I need to figure out how to do something on kind of a one-off sort of level, like oh, I'm hitting a problem at work and I need to like figure out how to do this thing, I might look at YouTube, but probably not that much for those kinds of things. Usually I'll just start Googling the issue or the problem or the thing that I need to learn, and it's usually more like written content that I'm looking at
Mm.
for those kinds of things. Stack Overflow is like sort of the de facto world renowned like forum for getting coding help or like software engineering help. It's basically like think of it as like a Reddit for coding, where it's like oh I'm hitting this error in my system. How do I fix this? And then people just like are on there and are helpful, and it's a whole community. So that's more common for one-off issues.
Very cool. Now, I don't want to take any much more of your time, but I did have a topic of crypto that I wanted to talk about, and
Yeah,
specifically some a little bit that we talked about where if you it could potentially go into a roundabout way of, I think the main problem with crypto right now is that my you can't explain it to, like, I would say if you walked past 10 people on the street and then you asked them to just to briefly explain what Bitcoin is or crypto or blockchain, one of those people will be like, "Oh, I know what that is. I have this and that, and I have a coin wallet or whatever." And I think you could go a roundabout way, and the whole point of crypto, and it's great because you can just do like peer to peer, and there's no like middleman in there or like a bank taking your money and then using it. It's just yours and it's in your wallet. It's very similar to cash, but you can send it across the world in an instant, and it can be verified and tracked. But since it's complicated, you may need a middleman. So it's like, do
yeah,
you follow crypto, and do you think like what are we kind of waiting on? And do you think it will be
yeah.
the currency?
Maybe. I do follow it loosely. I followed it more a few years ago. I do own. I have traded and currently do own some cryptocurrency. Nothing that's gonna make me rich or anything like that. I wish
Dogecoin? Do
hindsight's
you own
2020.
Doge?
I tried to buy Dogecoin one day, but my current crypto broker actually didn't offer it, and I got really kind of annoyed with it. But then it was fine at the same time. Um, I have Ethereum as my main crypto, and then Bitcoin. I got a little Bitcoin actually for free when I originally bought my Ethereum, so I have a little bit of that as well.
Nice.
But yeah, like nothing to nothing to write home about. I'm not breaking the bank with it. It was just more like out of curiosity or interest. Um, so I think crypto's tough because I think conceptually it's a great. I like the idea. I think it's a great idea. I think it makes a lot of sense. I think it's a very hard sell in the world um, because it requires a very strong technical background or understanding. I feel like to really know how it works and why would I want to use crypto versus like traditional financial institutions. Um, I'm sorry, my cat's going crazy.
It's all right.
Um, and I I think there's going to be political pressure that would stop crypto from becoming more than it is today. And today it's just kind of this like fun, fluffy, like side investment that people have and try and make money on, and some people have like struck gold with it. But I think if crypto ever got to a level where it could legitimately compete with like the banks of the world, I think they would just get squashed down through political pressure. Not that I want to get political or anything here, but like I think of it the same way as like energy. Like I feel like we're in a day and age where the promise and the ability to produce energy using renewable resources, like we're there. Like the technology, I feel like, is at a place where we could start really leaning into that. But we're still very reliant on more traditional forms of energy production because there are powerful people and organizations and companies at play that have a seat at the table to kind of influence decisions, and like it's going to be hard for us to continue to break away from those more traditional ways of energy production. Same idea with like crypto. Like even if everyone understood crypto, I think there would be a lot of disinformation out there in the world because the whole basis of crypto would be to remove traditional banking institutions as they exist today. And I think there's just like way too much momentum behind banks and sort of the economic value that they arguably provide in our world too, where it would be hard to have them just like go away.
Well, and then this might be my lack of understanding of it, but so say I'm super late to the crypto market and things. So like you bought in early, you amassed all this wealth in the crypto. I have, my normal amount of money. Say we make the same amount of money. We're in the same financial situation. You invest your money in crypto, I have mine in IRAs. We're both close to millionaires, right? And then so you start investing, you go crypto, and then you quickly explode into multi-millionaire into crypto, or let's say you make it to 500 million, but I just have a regular, I'm still at around a million. Why would what would incentivize me to now go to crypto? Because now I have to buy at such a small, like I'm just at a disadvantage. So where we were totally equal, you just inflated, and now I have to play in a ring where now you're 500 times richer than I. It's like,
Yeah, that's an interesting one too, and I think like I guess the stuff that I was just talking about too is really looking at crypto in terms of a like through the lens of everyday banking and like peer-to-peer transactions and like oh I need to go buy a bagel, like let me go spend some money on the bagel.
mhm.
Um, I think I think in order to get to that level where cryptocurrency is prevalent in the world as like a day-to-day currency, we have a ways to go before we even land on like what the quote unquote winner will be. Right now there are like hundreds of cryptocurrencies on the market, and like Bitcoin is sort of the de facto one right now, followed by Ethereum. Um, but like the market's way too volatile right now. Like it's hard to know or tell. It's too early in the cycle to know like which cryptocurrency will reign supreme in the future and like which one would be a widely accepted payment option at your local bars and restaurants and bookstores or whatever. I think like what you're touching on is an issue that uh, could prevent us from reaching a point where crypto could become that ubiquitous in our lives, because um, that's more like around the investment side of crypto. And like I'm buying cryptocurrency because I think this one cryptocurrency is going to become more of a winner, and like it is going to become more prevalent in the marketplace. Like that's a whole like other angle on the crypto topic, because there's going to be a lot. It's like people who invest in different currencies. I don't think there's a lot of people who do that because the currency market's kind of like evened out. But same idea,
Right.
like when each country has their own currency, and like there could be a world where before things really like evened out, where one day the U.S. dollar could be way more than like the British pound, and then like 2 years later it starts vying in competition. We're at that stage where like crypto is brand new. These things are all like vying for competition, so people are taking advantage of that for like investment purposes. And there's a long way to go before we know which one could be a winner.
Yeah, it kind of seems like it's like the 49 gold rush right now, right? Like a bunch of people are uprooting and moving to California for the dream of mining a bunch of gold. And do we even know if we can sell gold later? Is that what the market wants? And then if there is so much gold that it becomes saturated, nobody cares about gold, and now you have a bunch of gold, that just isn't worth a lot. So, uh,
Yeah,
I think it's going to be interesting
there's
over the next few
a
years.
there's a good my friend actually told me about this because I didn't realize what it was. I'm trying to look it up right now, but like however long ago, like 100, 200 years ago, whatever it was, there was a famous spike in tulip like value, like the flower, like
Hmm.
tulips the flower, where you look at like the value of tulips over time, and it had a very similar spike that crypto had like circa 2016, where it was just like very very low value, and then all of a sudden this hype got built up, and the market just like completely skyrocketed and created this bubble. And then sure enough, I forget the details of what happened with the tulip trade, but it all just like came crashing down. When that happened with crypto in 2016, I was pretty convinced that like crypto's heyday was kind of done with, and it was probably just gonna like slowly fizzle out. But sure enough, in 2020, crypto's actually made a an even stronger resurgence. So we'll see where it goes from here.
Yeah, but I mean, I feel like I'm so far away from somebody. I mean, I don't know. I might do it for fun, but if someone was like, "Hey, can I pay for my membership in Bitcoin? Would you accept it?" I feel like right now I'd be like, at least try it just so I'd have some." You're shaking your head. No, I would at least just
Yeah.
collect some, maybe. But like I said, for fun, it would be the same thing if someone was like, "Hey, I have these really cool swords that I got from Japan. Do you want them? You could potentially sell them later if that's cool." Or Pokemon cards. Like it would be around that same thing. Like in 20 years, Charizard might be worth double. I'm like, I don't
Yeah,
care.
it's like yeah, I think like anyone's like investment portfolio or whatever, like I wouldn't put any more money into it than like what you're willing to lose, cuz like who knows what's going to happen with it. Like these people who just go like all in on like
Crazy.
Dogecoin or crypto. Yeah, it's insane.
But
That's
I mean, some
extremely
people, well,
risky.
you obviously only hear the winners. Like, you hear of people making all this money, but like, if every loser was on Facebook and just put out, like, we're honest, you'd be like, why is anyone doing this? Like, my brother in law,
Yeah.
while I was out there, there was a little spike in Dogecoin, and he made close to 3 grand, and then he just pulled out what he put in. So now he's just letting it sit in there and just working off a profit. But that's like one example. And then I could be like, oh my God, I'm going to do that too. It's at a dip. And I put in like 4 grand. And I'm like, if this gets to $1, I'm going to be rich. It's like, it's true, but it could also get to 0.001 of a dollar.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's scary. Too volatile.
Oh yeah, and Safe Moon and all that stuff. So,
Yeah.
ah, man, it's getting dark there. I got a light on. I knew the sun.
I know. I need to like hit my light here. Hold on one second, actually. Boom.
Boom. Cool, man. Well, I think it's winding down. The first podcast complete, unless you have anything.
No, not really. I was all geared up to talk about the dark web, but
Oh no, no,
save
no! Hold
that for
on.
another
I
conversation.
mean, we could well, let's. This happened the same thing on Drew's. We were like winding down. There was like I was like, "Do you have 10 minutes?" I mean, I have time, but uh, we could definitely let's hit the dark
I
web. I mean, I did text you. So my main question on the dark web is: you hear it's again, it's one of those. It gets referenced in movies. You're like, oh, they were on the dark web. It's like, do you just go on darkweb.com? Like, is it a different programming? Like, is the dark web HTML5 and Python? Like, please go.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So there's three main levels you can think of in terms of the web. So there's the open web, there's the deep web, and then there's the dark web.
Mm.
Um, yeah, so think of the open web as any website that you can land on that is completely publicly accessible and you can find by like Googling for it. So like CNN.com, right? Like you can find it on Google, you can go there, you can view content on CNN or your news outlet of choice without having to log in, except for some like now, like make you log in with paywalls and stuff, but ignore that. That's the open web. The deep web, although it sounds somewhat mysterious, really isn't that mysterious at all. So the deep web is the internet in which you can only access by like logging into something. So
Like my
like
OnlyFans account.
your yeah, exactly. Your OnlyFans account. Obviously, you're a major content creator on OnlyFans or what
How do you
have
think I
you.
paid for this
Uh,
Banksy painting?
yeah, exactly. That stuff
Sorry, go
doesn't
ahead.
come cheap.
Yeah, sorry, go
No,
ahead.
no. So that's the deep web, right? Anything that like you can't like I can't like go to Google and like pull open pull pull open your OnlyFans account. And then the dark web is sort of a different thing. The dark web uh, is called it's like the onion router. It was actually developed, I think, by the government, I want to say. So the idea is you have your browser, your computer that's trying to talk with like a server over here because everything that goes to your browser is coming from a server. So normally how that happens is your browser has a very like linear line of communication where it talks to maybe a few different like takes a few different hops on the internet and then it hits the server. The dark web or the onion router Tor it goes through a system of these different servers that will randomly or kind of semi-randomly forward your request from one to another to another to another, and then eventually it'll hit the end location that you were trying to get to. So the distinction there is in the earlier example, like the normal web, your connection is somewhat easily traceable. Like you know where that connection's kind of coming from. You can trace it back. There are ways to find out like where you are. With the dark web or the onion router, I keep on saying that randomization of connections in between prevents the ability for the tracking to kind of go back to you as an individual. It's basically creating your presence on the internet to be very, very anonymous, where you can't trace someone's activity at all. So, in order to access the dark web, you actually need a like a special browser which is Tor. Tor is the browser of choice. So I think you can just go to Google. I've actually never gone on the dark web, so this is like just more like informational. But you can like Google Tor. You can download this browser, and that browser is set up to hit the dark web. And then sites hosted on the dark web, you know how like most websites end in .com or .org or .net or whatever? Sites hosted on the dark web end in .onion. So if you try and hit a website on the dark web with a .onion extension, you'll successfully make it through. If you try and use like your normal everyday like Google Chrome browser or whatever and try and hit a website with a .onion extension on the dark web, it won't load. It won't do anything for you. Um, so the whole idea is basically creating a basically an internet connection where it can't be traced back to you. And unfortunately, that is rife for criminal activity or like trying to do commerce or stuff on the internet that is illegal because it can't be traced back to you. And then to tie this back to crypto, it actually, the currency of choice for these kinds of nefarious services on the dark web is pretty much cryptocurrency, because I guess like one thing that we didn't really touch on with crypto is transactions with crypto are also anonymous, where you can't actually tie back the transaction to individual person's identity. So it's just like between having Tor and crypto, you're all set to
Buy that cocaine,
high.
dog. No, I'm just. How do
Yeah,
you?
exactly.
How would you build a website on like? So say we got a couple kilos of coke and we wanted to sell it on the dark web. Is it the same?
Hypothetically.
Hypothetically, uh, buy cocaine.onion. So do you just could you just build a website that just has login information and then like you just do .onion, like, or do you have to like go on the dark web, download something to be able to build on the dark web? Do you
That's
do
a
you know
great
what I'm asking?
question. Yeah, I know what you're asking. Like, how do you basically create content on the dark web?
Right. Yeah.
Um, and that I actually don't know. That's a great question. I would imagine like the practices of like building the website or the application on the dark web would be the same as like any other website or application. The nuance would be like how to actually get it like published out. That I'm actually not sure about, but I'm kind of curious about that and want to find out now.
Yeah, right, because you're if you wanted to make a new website right now, you would just
Yeah,
go on and just tap into a server and then create the website on the server, right? And then people it would be
yeah.
on the web and then you could make it into a deep web and have access to that. But then if you wanted to do the same thing, then are there specific dark web servers or are there like Amazon servers that are just by mistakenly hosting dark websites that they don't even know?
I wouldn't be surprised. I'm not positive on that, so I don't know the answer for sure. But if I had to guess, I would guess that anything that's hosted on the dark web is being hosted like any other on the same infrastructure as any other like application or website. So it could feasibly be on Amazon or AWS. I would bet that if Amazon or AWS discover that there was a nefarious dark web app hosted on it, they would boot them off. But you would
Right.
have to find that first. Um, but
So potentially
the
there might be organizations or groups that have servers that are connecting to the dark web, like hosting their own servers with their own server rooms that are specific to dark web that only host dark websites.
Totally, yeah. I mean, you can make a server out of anything. Like, I think servers always like they sound like these like super complex, massive, complicated machines, but your everyday home computer, can act as a server, and you could have feasibly a dark web server just like running in your house or your apartment that people are connecting
Yeah,
to. There's
don't main
nothing
businesses
to
and
stop
everything
that.
just call it like intranet? So they have like a server that's inside, like on the ship. We had an intranet that only the ship can talk through and you can't
Yeah.
access it. And then we had regular internet. So it's like you could email somebody on the intranet peer to peer and it doesn't go out and come back in. It just goes right through. Interesting.
Yep. Absolutely.
So
Good
yeah, we
stuff.
got a next podcast. We really got to talk about maybe let's try to make our own dark website, dark dark web website.
Dark web website dot onion.
Yeah, we got to let all the viewers and commenters comment their favorite dark web website name. What would we call it? Dot onion, you know?
Yeah, there we go. I love it.
Interesting. Interesting. No, thank you for looking that up and giving me the rundown on the dark web. It seemed like it was one of those like you log in and like the screen gets, goes into night mode and there's just like things floating around and like things, but like similar to the internet, you can't get to certain websites unless you know the address, right? So you could be on the dark web
Yeah.
and you could just be like and just find
Well,
nothing.
yeah. So I think like what's interesting too is I think like I was watching this guy's video where he was describing this where I think like the dark web itself, like the name itself almost makes it sound like more nefarious than it really should be too, because it's like the dark web. But really all it is like it's like the private web. It is like it's out there. Like you don't have to like log into some secret. Well, I guess you kind of do, but not really. Like it's out there in the world. It's not like this underground like black market thing. It's very easily accessible by anyone. Like you don't have to like know a guy to access the dark web. Anyone can access it.
Or like put a helmet on before you
But
go in. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, but like I think that's because the technology and like the idea behind the dark web uh, is not necessarily to be a black market or a malicious place. It's really I think the origins of it, as I understand, were actually meant to be um, like a positive thing. It was meant to provide a new standard through which web communication could happen
Just a
in a
second internet, right?
private, yeah, like in
Yeah.
an anonymous way. Like I mean this kind of ties back to what we were talking about with like how like companies and websites and organizations and marketers track your every movement to try and like sell you stuff. Like I think the dark web is a way to like move away from that world, move into a world where your online activity truly is anonymous and you're not being tracked everywhere you go by marketing tactics. But unfortunately, a side effect of being able to go online and in a completely private, anonymized way also means that it's a great place to do illegal activity. So
Right.
there's that.
Oh, all right, man. That's the
Good
dark web.
stuff.
Yeah. Let me
That's it.
let me stop